Hey, everybody, welcome to this episode of Compassion and Courage Conversations in Healthcare. I'm your host, Marcus Engel. This is the podcast where I teach compassionate communication, provide perspective, and inspire resilience. Thank you to everyone who is rating and reviewing and sharing and doing all those social media engagement things. Thank you for helping us get the word out there. Today, I am super excited to get to interview somebody who is a personal hero of mine. Did you know that, Jonathan?
I did not know that. You're my hero, so that's pretty cool.
All right. Well, and I'm not kidding, Jonathan. You are truly one of the people that I admire and I look up to so much. That's doing this work, not just in patient caregiving, but helping us get the word out about what it means to be present, about compassion, about empathy, and really helping get into the essence of our humanity. So thank you for doing the work that you do, for inspiring me, and I don't want to talk. I want to hear you. I like to hear you talk. But let's give everybody a little bit of professional background. You're an RN at University of Virginia Hospital, and what do you do as a nurse?
My present incarnation is I am a palliative care liaison nurse for the adult population here at the University of Virginia. So I work with the consulting team and do a lot of early identification, triaging, and education of nurses on both palliative care and end of life care.
And so, what does that look like on a typical day? What kind of conversations are you having, and with whom?
Um, any given day, I round in most of the ICUs and I ask the charge nurses to help me identify those patients who their trajectory may not be the best trajectory or their symptoms are not being managed and they have life-limiting illnesses. And they help me to identify those patients who may even require early conversations around their goals in advanced care planning. And then I also meet with patients each day and try to help them and make sure our team is providing the best care and also supporting people who are facing life-limiting illnesses so that they are supported and they have a network around them and they feel supported as they go through these difficult times that they're going through.
You are so equipped to do this work, obviously, as a nurse, but can you take us back a little bit in time, like back to your early days? Did you always want to be a nurse? How did you get into this world of professional healthcare?
So prior to all this, I actually got into healthcare when I was 18. My father was a physician. I was looking for work, and he got me a job as an orderly in Buffalo, New York in 1986. And so that puts me a little bit above 30 years for my healthcare experience. But back then, when I first started, I was like any typical 18-year-old punk, just trying to figure things out and grow up and just try to navigate things. And I really did a lot of growing up because I wasn't used to working with people that have suffering. I wasn't really used to working with the empathy that we need to develop, and that was something I had to grow into and learn. During that time in the 80s, that was 86, that was the height of the HIV epidemic. So I was there for that first sort of pre-pandemic experience. So I got exposed to a lot of stuff, and as I was working through that, I one day I looked at one of the nurses I was working with, and they were overworked back then, exhausted. And the nurse looked at me. We're eating dinner, and she goes, "Whatever you do, don't ever become a nurse." And she was, I could tell she was speaking from pain, from heartache, from just the difficulty of what she was going through. So I took it with a grain of salt, but I also took it seriously and said, you know what, I'm going to try to avoid this. But I ended up working in healthcare and phlebotomy and other roles. And then listening to her, but also listening to, I don't know if you know Joseph Campbell. He's a writer and a philosopher. And he had this thing in some of his teachings called follow your bliss. And so he had suggested, in your life, you must always follow your bliss, whatever that is. At that time, I realized that studying comparative religion may be my bliss, and so I chased that. And then at one point during my education, one of my family members died, and it was my brother. And Brian died of a glioblastoma, and he was 34, and he was leaving behind 5 kids under the age of 10.
Wow. And
And that,
you were how old at that time?
man, it must have been, I had 3 kids, so I'm thinking 26,
26 or so.
27. Yeah, we we
Wow.
we we have kids early in Buffalo, New York. At least my family did. But so it was wild, man. I got called back, and I got called to take care and help my brother and help my family. And that experience of being at the bedside of my brother, of helping his family navigate, and of doing vigil with him as he died, was a catalyst for me to stop pursuing comparative religion, because in the study of comparative religion and Eastern philosophy, there was a lot of pontificating and a lot of theorizing, but there wasn't a lot of action. And that experience told me I had to switch up. And so I dropped out of grad school at that time and pursued nursing. And then the rest is history, in terms of where I ended up and where I am now.
Thank you for sharing the story of your brother, and I send my extended sympathy. I'm not sure, it's a brother. I don't have a brother, so
Right.
I've got an older sister, but I don't have a brother, and losing that relationship is something that's rather foreign to me. But I can only imagine the amounts of. It sounds like you guys were close.
Yeah, he was one of my favorite brothers, and I'm one of 7 kids, and he was everyone's favorite. So um, the pain is gone. Um, the event was a catalyst for me to realize if I could care for my brother as he was dying, and back there in the 80s, or that was now in the 90s, it still was pretty bad. If you were dying, they put you in a hallway, in the back hallway, and you may not see a nurse for, 6 hours at a time. And it was a very different form of end of life care than we ideally have today. And in some situations, we're just nurses are overwhelmed to be able to provide the type of care I think which is truly essential in end of life, which is to really treat them with the same intensity and respect that you would if you were doing an ICU patient. Or for me, I was a trauma nurse for years. It's the same. My focus is the same. I've got to be there for that patient, be there for that family.
So let's talk about your work as a trauma nurse for a little bit, because it was during your work as a trauma nurse that another event happened that set you on a different trajectory altogether. Well, maybe not altogether different, but in a different light, to more formal ways of being.
So I worked in trauma for about 6 years, and this was after being burned out as a hospice and palliative care nurse. What do you do when you're burned out, right? You go into something way more intense, which is what I did. I went from, palliative and hospice care to emergency and trauma, but I took to it like a fish to water. I really loved that environment, loved that work, but that also took a toll. And I think what we do in healthcare over time takes a toll, just because we're exposed to so many forms of suffering. And I often tell people it's like going into water and walking out. You're going to get wet. And we get wet when we go into what we do in healthcare, and we get wet by being affected by suffering. And so, how do we cope with that? How do we navigate that? And at that point, when I was working in the ER, I had the blessing of being invited to Being with Dying course with Roshi Joan Halifax. I'm not sure if you're familiar with her
Yes,
work.
absolutely.
Roshi Joan and I are now friends, and she's really awesome. But I was just some trauma punk going down there to do her Being with Dying course, which was really quite amazing. If anyone gets a chance to do that, her being with dying course was one of the, I want to identify as one of the earliest forms of attempts at dealing with resiliency, using mindfulness, using evidence-based, and using techniques over a 7-day period to help healthcare providers deal with their secondary trauma, deal with the potential burnouts that are happening. And I did that course out in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and it was amazing. And Roshi Joan, every time she does that course, gives you a mandate. So when you leave, she says, before you go, I want you now to take the benefits that you've received from this course, and I want you to go into your work and your areas of work, and I want you to make a difference. I want you to take that and make a change.
And you've done
Part
that.
of that, yeah, part of that was I was with a woman named Dory Fontaine, who was dean of the School of Nursing at the time, brand new dean. She comes out of this, and what she does is starts the Compassionate Care Initiative, which is a program here at UVA that I've been a part of from the beginning, which again is focused on resiliency. And this is before all this buzzword of resiliency. And we can get back to that because I get that you can't yoga and breathe away some of the suffering we do, and that's not what it's about. But for me, not to get too lost in that rabbit hole, I went back to the ER and I looked around and I'm like, man, what do I do? I'm not an end of life guy and I'm coming back with all this stuff and man, I'm feeling great. I want to make a difference. And that's when I noticed how we respond to death. And I noticed that we weren't responding in the best way possible. Most times we're turning our backs to the body. I saw physicians get angry and frustrated and walk away as if there was fault to be had in the death of that patient. And I saw the patient was left in the bed, and the patient was left for me, the nurse or the aide, to clean up and then to go through the process of preparing for the morgue. But there wasn't any sort of closure with that. And what I noticed one day was a chaplain stopped the whole room and she did this Judeo-Christian prayer. And I was like, man, stopping the whole room is pretty bold after a trauma because there's like 30 people in there. And I said, I like that. I said, that prayer stuff didn't speak to me in the way it could. How can I do that differently? Because I may not be of the same tradition this woman was from, and she did in a very Christian, Judeo-Christian kind of way. And I said, how can I modify this? And also, I went back to my years of religious studies, and I realized that death is a rite of passage, and we have to honor it. And I wanted to find a secular way to honor that. And so what I did the next time a trauma happened and the next time a patient died, I asked the room to stop. And because of who I was and perhaps the respect I had, the room did stop after the death. And I said, would it be okay if we now take a moment to honor this person in this bed, to honor the life that we have in front of us, to honor the fact that they were loved and loved by others, that they had a life, and they're no longer here. And if we could take a moment in silence and in our own ways, hold that space, and also honor the work that we've done, honor the work that the EMS have done, honor all the care this patient has had, but do this in silence and hold that space. Would that be okay? And the room acknowledged, and then we stood, and that was the first time the pause had ever been practiced. And the results are now historic because it's now become a thing. Yeah.
So whenever we talk about the pause, we're putting that with a capital T and a capital P, the pause, right?
Right. Or I say the medical pause
The medical.
because I want to delineate it from other types of pausing, which are also essential in our lives.
And this makes so much sense in the ER to have those, especially those who really worked hard to save the life of that patient, to take a moment and honor your own work. But this, you've seen this expand out from the ER.
So I ended up being encouraged to publish it, and I published it in the American Academy of Critical Care Nurses. And I wrote a piece for them, and I remember meeting one of the editors years ago at a where was it? It was a Schwartz Center Compassionate Care Provider of the Year Awards, and I was one of the candidates for it. And I was at a dinner with this guy, and he said, I saw the article you wrote for the American Academy of Critical Care Nurses," and he said, "I didn't know what to do with it because you wrote a narrative, and we are a research kind of magazine."
Yeah.
He said, "But I didn't know what to do, but I just handed it on." And so they ended up publishing it as a side piece in that magazine. And that really got people's attention and got people talking about it and looking at it. And so it spread in that way. And then people started speaking about it and presenting after they'd heard about it, using me in their own presentations, using the story in their own presentations, and it became kind of viral. And it spread not only from my ER, but across the country and then across the world. It's on 7 continents now. But the spread in a way that it's not written in stone when you should practice this. So it can be done after someone is expected to die. So perhaps you're withdrawing life-sustaining measures and you're allowing a person to die naturally. It can be done then. It can be done at the time of death or afterwards, hours afterwards. It can be done out in the field. EMS providers and fire and paramedic are doing it now in the field as they practice. It can be done. I even heard of a vet in South Africa that's doing it in their huge veterinary institution. And so it's really kind of spread in a way that's organic. It's been presented in a way that allows people to take ownership of it. I didn't copyright it or make it any particular institutional pause. What I wanted from it, even my website, which we'll talk about later, was self-funded so that I could just create this concept and allow people to adopt or not adopt. And when they adopt, it becomes their practice. It's theirs to have. It's theirs to do.
I love this. And whenever you and I first became acquainted with one another, and I first heard about the pause circa, what, probably 2011, 2012 maybe? And I remember even saying to you in our first conversation, which felt like I'm communicating with a long lost friend and brother. So I've appreciated our friendship over these years. But I remember saying to you, it's something like, I'm here. What I'm doing is the that's the initial interaction with a patient and practicing presence, and then the pause at the end of one's life. Um, that's the end. It's like the bookends that are presence, which we get to do, which is our humanity, right? I'm sure you can school me much more whenever we get into the philosophy and mysticism and comparative religion aspects. But it's what we get to do, and I love that this concept is giving closure to those nurses and other healthcare professionals that are witnessing such suffering.
It's they're acts of compassion,
Yeah,
right?
right.
If we delineate, which I love, the Dalai Lama describes the difference between sympathy, empathy, and compassion, right? And he says sympathy is looking at someone, say you're walking down the street and you see someone buried beneath a rock, and sympathy is, wow, that looks awful. Ooh, glad that's not me. Empathy is seeing that person under that rock and saying, oh my God, I can feel that. I feel that in my own self. I can feel the way that feels to be. And then compassion is seeing that person under that rock and not only being sympathetic, not only being empathetic, but actually putting action behind that, which is to move under that rock and try to help lift that rock. And so the I'm here movement and the pause movement are simple acts of compassion. They're not only acts of compassion for the individuals. If we understand compassion more fully, compassion cannot happen unless compassion happens for ourselves and for the other human being. So in, say, your movement, the I'm here movement, that person, when I say that as a nurse to a patient, when I'm leaning over them in the trauma bay and I say I'm here, that act also tells them, it connects me to them in a way that cannot connect in any other way, and reassures them, but it also reassures myself that I am going to be there. It inspires me to continue to be there. And the same for the act of the pause. The pause initially, I have to be honest, was started as a very selfish act. I wanted to heal myself, and I wanted to find ways to heal my coworkers. I didn't realize the benefits that it would have for those who stand on the outside of that and watch it happen. That be family members, or that be security or police or anyone else who witnesses the practice of the pause. They're seeing a physical representation of compassion, because that act of standing in silence shows that you mean more than just your disease. You mean more to me than anything else. Just like when in the beginning, if you say I'm here, it says you mean more to me than the fact that you're a patient lying in this bed.
I don't want to overthink anything, right? I'm a fairly simple guy. So whenever we talk about being present, this is not something you need to go study in school. This is just being human and allowing oneself to be human and communicating that humanity to those that we get to serve, and also hopefully to ourselves. I think what you said earlier was something: we can't extend compassion to others unless we are also extending it to ourselves. I think that's a good word for me. That's a good word for me, and I think for those people who might have a loud inner self critic. But what we do to heal ourselves also allows us to help heal others. I, I I just feel like this is the way, right? This is the
Well,
way.
it reminds me of medical errors, right? Anyone who works in healthcare, and I tell this to students when I'm doing these kind of self care retreats, we're human and we're fallible, and we're going to make mistakes. You can follow two different paths. You can follow the critic who will beat themselves down like, you are so stupid. Why did you make that mistake? And how many of us have not said that to ourselves? I know I have, and I know I've seen it in others. That's why medical errors are so astounding. And it's medical errors happen. It's, for me, acknowledging that error is the most important thing. That's the act of compassion, is verbally acknowledging I made that mistake, and then moving forward, never making the same mistake twice. That's really how I've coped with medical errors throughout my whole career. And I know, speaking with healthcare providers, both nurses, physicians, aides, making medical errors is a huge burden that people carry. And it's a huge, it can lead to a lot of pain and suffering. And how we deal with that, both personally and as institutions, is going to be really important
Eh,
moving forward.
Boy, yeah, I couldn't agree with that more, and especially after these last couple of years that all of you in the hospitals have lived through, too. What an upheaval. There's always a time for more humanity, there's always a time for healing and resiliency, but boy, right now we need it more than ever. I don't know. You can put a finer point on it than me for the time that you've spent inside the facilities over the last couple of years.
Well, it's the industrial medical complex. And what we've realized is they don't always have our back. And it's not their fault. It's you put industrial in front of anything, it becomes a business and becomes a very separate entity in and of itself. Um, I think moving forward, I'm hoping that part of my compassion and part of my self care, part of my resiliency work would be to be an advocate for institutions to make changes that are more pro social and more supportive of nurses, not as cogs, but as essential aspects of those systems. And that means bringing nurses to tables, bringing nurses to give voice. Giving nurses and physicians and anyone in healthcare the capacity to help define how we move things moving forward, not just throughput, output, but doing it in the best way possible to not do harm to ourselves. And
Yeah, not do harm to ourselves, right? How do we keep a staff if they cannot stay resilient? And how do you stay resilient if the systems are holding you, by both legs? It's a difficult field to straddle.
yeah, man, if you say I got to use a mask over and over again for a week, and you're saying you don't have enough masks, then something's
Yeah,
wrong.
yeah.
And that's running things in a way that needs to be adjusted, to be prepared, to be able to flex up, to be able to support, and to be able to all of us move forward. Because sick people are not going away. How we take care of them and how we take care of the staff that take care of them is going to be really, really
And
important.
I think that whenever staff practices the pause, when anytime we stop and take a moment to be intentionally present in this moment to experience everything that is happening around us, our internal feelings, our internal physiological things, our what's going on in the brain, how does the air feel, whenever we get in touch with our senses and we can be present like that, it takes us out of that monkey mind thinking that we talk about in many Eastern religions, right? That the brain will consistently jump to things like a monkey. And if we can pause and breathe and take a moment, it does help us feel more like ourselves.
Well, and it helps us to move in a way that is effective and safe and proper. Um, and that it reminds me of any time a trauma would come in, I would take 4 deep breaths. And because I'm a practicing meditator, the 4 deep breaths are not very much, but for me, it was a way to ground myself so that when I was faced with chaos, I could go at it in a way that was clear, that was open, and was receptive, and was ready to move and adapt and do. Um, that's what pausing does on a day-to-day basis. The practice of the pause is not a panacea. It's not going to make everything all good. I often think about the 5-year-old I held in a trauma bay after his head was cracked open. And that pain, that doesn't go away. That goes with me, that stays with me. Um, my relationship with the different aspects of suffering change over time. But the pause is a first step towards pointing the way towards self care. And how do I take care of myself while taking care of other human beings? And I think that's the most important thing that I walk away from that practice and from what I do in terms of trying to help others.
So I'm going to be really selfish and ask you a question. Do you have some guidance for me and other wannabe meditators? Those of us who work and practice, but sometimes get distracted and feel like our practice isn't enough.
I want to caveat all of it with I am no teacher. I'm a practitioner and I'm a beginner like everybody else. That being said, I think even if you can take 5 minutes a day to sit and take a couple deep breaths, throughout the day, taking little bullets of practice where you can stop and step away will help to create neural pathways, which they've done research on, which helps your brain to kind of be able to fall into that practice easier and easier over time. Um, the fact that your mind is distracted and full, it will always be that way. But how we respond to it, how we move through it, as someone who's practiced over time, it gets easier and easier to step into a quieter space so that I can step out into a chaotic situation and maintain an eye of the storm while I'm in the middle of the storm. But it can't happen overnight. It's not, again, it's something you just have to continue to practice and be kind to yourself about it. Many of the teachers I've read always say that it's if you're vigilant and hardcore about it, man, you're not going to keep up with it. You're going to hate it. It'll be like, dude, I got to go sit and do that, and I'm going to friggin'. I mean, some people will do it and do it well, and that's their pathway. For me, I know that's not necessarily the best pathway. But these minor bullets of practice over time seem to really help, and they do make a difference over time.
Yeah, I found that I don't know, I'm 4 or 5 years into a good meditation practice these days, but I still feel like such a beginner. Still feel like such a beginner, but it does get easier. It does get easier, as you said.
No, and I'm 25 years in, and I'm still a beginner, dude. I think anyone who comes on who says they're the cat's meow is
They
full of it.
probably got a book to sell.
Yep, I don't have a book yet.
I'd love to help you with that. I'd love to help you with that. I know that there's a lot of wisdom contained between your ears. So, hey, in the time we have left, I'd like to shoot a couple of rapid fire questions past you that really are not anything to do with nursing or philosophy or compassion or pauses or anything like that. Are you up for it? All
Dude,
right.
do it.
So, my first question for you is, let's say you're stranded on the proverbial desert island. You've got all your food covered, you've got housing, you've got clothing, and you get to keep one piece of art with you, whether that is a book, a film, a sculpture, a what else? Album. What piece of art would you keep?
No, dude, you're asking tough questions, man.
As an artist, I
Piece of
understand
art.
that. And
Right.
you feel free to talk a little bit about your art too. I love that you
Would
do.
I could I keep if you mention art, could I keep my utensils that would be able to allow me to create more
Ooh,
art?
boy, that's a good
Or
question.
because you're asking me to keep a piece, or can I just keep creating
Boy,
art?
that's a good question. You found a good workaround for that.
Yeah, and as an artist, I do abstract art. I also do carvings and things, but that's part of my resiliency training is to speak without words, to use my art to speak a language that's beyond just the spoken or written word. So I would probably want that capacity to continue.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Love it. Second question for you. Let's say you opened up your wallet and you found a magical $100 bill had appeared in there. And that magical $100 bill has to be spent on you yourself. And it has to be done today. What do you spend that $100 on?
Spend that $100 on. Dude, again, you're stumping me. I'm gonna get you back. I would spend it on more art supplies,
That's awesome.
Marcus,
Awesome.
so that I could create more art for other people
That is fantastic.
and and heal myself at the same time.
I know a few years ago you had posted that you had made a carving, I think a walking stick for a friend, and I remember you saying that with every time you ran sandpaper or a chisel or a carving knife over it, every cut was made with compassion. And I think about that frequently. What can I be doing in creation? I don't create visual art, obviously. I writing would be my art, but what can I do to make sure that every word, phrase, etc., is filled with compassion? I think on your teaching there a lot. I don't know if you realized what a great teaching you put on Facebook.
Not a lot of trash, but yeah. But yeah, I would argue, Marcus, that you could carve. You just have to have protective gloves. But I think for you as a tactile person who cannot see, carving might be your thing, or clay might be your thing to, if you want to move beyond words, because you could form things that you could then see with your hands,
Yeah,
which would be maybe not carving, maybe the sharp knife. I know you well enough that giving you a sharp knife might not be the best
may not be
idea.
for a variety of reasons. No, I think you knew, but about a year after my trauma, I lived in Colorado for a year, learning how to be blind at a rehab program. And just about the time I was leaving, they were starting an industrial arts whole department for students to, and they were using straight up band saws, jigsaws. I never got to do any of that. I left before it was actually installed, but I don't know. There's
Yeah.
something kind of healing about art, maybe, or about working with wood. Maybe I should go get myself a little kit or something and start.
Wood or clay,
Wood or
dude. I
clay.
think I think those are going to be your
Might
mediums.
do that.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So my last question for you then is: let's say you have the world's largest billboard on the highest mountain in the world. What is your message to humanity?
Just be kind.
Be kind. Yeah.
No, just be kind.
Just be kind.
That's it.
We can learn a lot from that, can't we? Just be
Yeah.
kind.
Yeah.
Jonathan, I cannot thank you enough for being with me today, for the work that you do, the work that you've done. And I can't wait to next time we get to sit down together.
Yeah, dude. We definitely need a pizza and a beer again.
It sounds like a plan. Sounds like a plan. All right.
All
Thank
right.
you, everyone, so much for joining me today for this episode of
Thank you.
Compassion and Courage. Thank you, Jonathan. This is the
Thank you.
podcast where I teach compassionate communication, provide perspective, and inspire resilience. Thank you all for joining me. Thank you for all the social media sharing, and we just appreciate you all being part of the Compassion and Courage community.
Did you want me to share my website?
Yes.
So my website is thepause.me. It is
Thepause.me.
self
Okay.
it is self-funded. That's all one word. And it was created by volunteers, and the video were all donated. And that was again to keep the pause universal for anyone who wants access. And I just appreciate the time.
Man,
Thank
we'll
you.
put it in the show notes and make sure people have a link straight to it. Cool.
All right.
Thanks.